Hello and welcome to Jill Cameron Creations. Today we're going to do a little bit of Copic coloring with a digital image. This image is the vintage teacup set from the Paper Shelter. I realized in just a few minutes as I'm coloring that I needed to mark where my camera was, so you'll see more of the teacups in the picture in just a second. I will have the colors of all of the Copic colors that I use over on my blog. One thing that I use with dark green is black in my darkest colors. So it gives a really deep dark area of green. And also notice that sometimes when I'm coloring, you'll see me hold the marker pretty much straight up, and that's so I can get teeny tiny little flicks and have more control over my marker. The other thing that I do when I write, personally when I write, I will tend to grip the pen or the pencil that I'm writing with really hard, where that carries over into my coloring as well. So I have to stop and remind myself to lighten my grip, and every once in a while you'll see me pause, and that's what I'm doing, is reminding myself to lighten my grip on my marker. I don't have a lot of greens, so when I was coloring this, the difference between my darkest green and my mid-tone was a little too much. Even though I had all these greens pulled out, the G29 and G24 just too big of a gap. So I did some tip to tip coloring, where I took my lightest color and touched it to the end of the marker on my darkest color, and that gives me that mid-tone that I really liked. And then I used a G21 as my lightest color on the leaves there. When I first started, and as you can see in the picture right now, there's a square in the top corner, and you'll also see a mark later on the top right hand side of the page. When I printed this, I printed it out using my Silhouette Studio software, which is a die cut machine. Real quick, you can use a white pen to fix any mistakes that you have where a marker bleeds or you go outside the lines. Easy peasy, nobody will ever know. But I used the Silhouette Studio to print it out, and the reason I did that is I'll be able to put it on a matte, Silhouette matte, and run it through my Silhouette Cameo 3, and I'll be able to die cut this very easily after I'm done coloring it. And I have a tutorial on how to die cut images using the Silhouette over on my blog as well, and I'll have a link to that tutorial so you can get access to that information. I use a Canon Pixma wide format printer, and mine's a little bit older model. I've had it for several years. It's an IP8720, and I'm printing on Nina Solar White cardstock. Now, the thing that I have learned using digital stamps is that I put my printer settings on draft mode so that it's not as much ink being put on the paper. If you find that when you start to color, your images are smearing, the line art itself is smearing when you're doing Copic coloring or any other kind of coloring with digital stamps, either there's too much ink on your paper or you need to let it dry overnight. When I first started doing digital stamps, I found that I got a whole lot of smearing, and I reduced it down to draft mode, and it works beautifully now. I get no smearing whatsoever. I would like to say as well that I'm not using Canon inks. I actually use, because Canon inks are super expensive, I use the refill multi-packs from iInk for Work, and I purchased those on Amazon, and I get great color results and great results when I'm doing digital stamps as well. So don't think that just because you don't have the same printer that I do, check into some different alternatives for inks that work, and these work great as well. I'll link to the inks that I use, the printer inks that I use over on my blog. The one thing that I want to also point out is utilize the line art that is drawn into your images. If you're not sure where to put shadows, remember that shadows are created by something laying over top of something else. But also look at where in the flower itself, there's little lines drawn in under things. So from one petal to the next, there is a little line that demonstrates that this petal is laying under this other petal, and here's kind of the middle of it. So pay attention to those and use those lines. Those are going to be where your darkest colors are going to be, and play with it. You don't have to follow every single rule that is out there for it. If you don't want it to look that deep and dark in the dark areas, then don't color it that way. Color it how you want to. And I will also say that if you are new to coloring things that you want dimension in, print off 4 or 5 of them, color the same part of that 2 or 3 times, and take and utilize what you did on one that you like the best, and just keep coloring it. That's the biggest thing with getting any kind of depth in your coloring, is to practice. It's just ink and paper. It's not the end of the world if you mess it up. It's just ink and paper. So practice, practice, practice. Even if you don't have Copic markers, there's several alternatives. Altenew makes a great alternative for alcohol markers. They have their own line of alcohol markers that actually coordinate with all of their inks. Then there are, of course, Spectrum Noir, and Pro markers, and there are several other companies out there that I've never used. There's reviews on YouTube for a bunch of different markers. My favorite is Copic's. It's actually the only ones I've ever used, and it's just because, well, they come in so many different colors. The sketch markers come in 300 and some odd colors. You don't need all of them by any stretch of the imagination, because they are expensive. And understanding how they work is important to getting good results from them. In the next couple of weeks, hopefully by mid-August, I'm going to have a little mini course available that's just the basics of alcohol, particularly Copic markers. And we'll talk about the blending families and what the numbers and letters mean. And we'll talk a little bit about some basic shading information, and we'll talk about a little bit about color theory. My background is not in the artistic world. This is stuff that I have learned over the years that makes sense to me as a card maker, and not as a graphic designer or a professional artist. This is stuff that I use on a daily basis for my card making. All of the colors, again, that I've used in my video are going to be over on my blog, listed there with links to where I purchased my products. When I'm coloring, I don't know if you've noticed or not, most people will start with doing a overall color over everything, and with their lightest color to get the cardstock wet. And that's fine. If that's how you want to color, that's fine. I tend to go from darkest to lightest and only do my colors one time, because I put so much ink down when I do the first go round. I don't need to go back over them. I put the darkest colors down, which are going to be where my shadows are. If you are nervous about putting your darkest color down first, then take your lightest color and fill in the areas where you think that the darkest color would go. Just take that really light color that you're going to use and do like what I'm doing on this teacup right now, where those lines of the darkest color are. Use your lightest color right there, and that way you have a little bit of a guide to start with, so that you're not so skittish about putting in that dark color, because it is scary when you get that dark color and you put it down on that paper and that's the only thing that's on there. You're like, oh, I've messed up so bad. Trust me, you haven't. Just keep going with it. I start with my darkest color. In the end, I use less ink that way, so it's a little bit of a frugality kind of thing. And also, this is just how I learned to Copic color that works for me. Other people, they go from lightest to darkest and then darkest back out to their lightest color, and they color twice. If I do that, I end up taking up too much real estate on my highlights. So I have found that doing my darkest color first and then going out to my lightest, and then if I need to deepen anything up, then I just deepen it up with, go back over it with my darkest colors and then blend where I need to. I don't go back over the whole thing necessarily. The other thing that I really, really, really love about alcohol markers, especially with Copics, is if I'm putting shadows on something, like with this gray marker, I've already colored my hearts and everything, but I still need them to have shadow. Well, instead of me going over all of it, instead of trying to get that shadow with my pink markers, I just go over it with my gray, and it automatically puts those pinks in shadow because they are transparent colors. They're not opaque colors. It's not gonna mix, so to speak. My pink is still pink. It's not any other color. It's just a dulled down pink because it has gray over top of it. Now, in order to have teacups that look white, you have to have shadows. Well, I did get a little heavy-handed with my shadows and my my grays on my teacups, and in the end I was really happy with it because they kind of look silver, and so did the plate, which was absolutely 100% fine with me. It's something that as you practice with your markers, and as you get better with your markers, depending on what you're going for, you'll get better at. And sometimes it's not going to turn out exactly like you wanted it to, but it will still be beautiful. No matter what, your Copic coloring is going to be beautiful. So don't stop in the middle of a project. Finish it. You'll learn something in it, and that's the important part of anything that you're doing, is that you learn that technique, that perfection isn't what it's about. And I think that's probably my biggest message today, is that card making is an art, and art is not about perfection. And whether you think of yourself as an artist as you're Copic coloring or stamping or die cutting or anything else, you're an artist when you're putting paper together and making something beautiful to give to somebody else. It is an art. So don't expect perfection from it, because that is A, unrealistic, and B, absolutely zero fun. So have fun with it, practice with it, and get where you want to be with it. I use my colorless blender a lot to fix mistakes, and don't be afraid to pull out that colorless blender. It's not going to erase absolutely all of your mistakes, but it can do a pretty good job of lightening them up so you can go back over it and fix it some other way. Copics are actually pretty forgiving, a pretty forgiving medium, so that's another reason why I really like Copics. And today, actually, my puppy dog is sitting with me today, laying in my lap, keeping me warm in my basement, even though it's 93 degrees outside. My basement's kind of chilly, and as you know, my studio is in my basement, so I'm sitting down here doing my voiceover. And I'll tell you a quick story while I'm finishing up coloring and stuff on this card. My boyfriend, I had a really stressful last Friday, and my boyfriend came home and said, "Come on, we're going to the beach." And we literally drove down 6 hours from Lynchburg, Virginia, down to Marl's Inlet in South Carolina to have dinner. And we stayed at the beach overnight and then turned around and came home the next day. It was a fun day. See, I put that on my mat. That was a Silhouette cutting mat, and I cut it out, and it's perfectly cut out. I didn't have to fussy cut it, and I would still be fussy cutting it in the time that it took me to put that in my, I I would still be doing it. So no, we're just, I'm not a fussy cutter by any stretch of the imagination. Putting some white highlights on my coffee cups on the edges, and fixing any spots where I went outside the line or something got bled or anything like that, and slide all of my stuff out of the way. And the 2 pieces of tape that are on my desk right there are so I knew where my frame size was for my camera. Base is 110-pound Mina Solar white cardstock, and I didn't want it necessarily to be a 1-layer card, but I didn't want to pop it up either, but I did want it to give it a little dimension. I'm not a fan of 1-layer cards myself for me to do. I love the look of them when other people do them, but it's just not my favorite thing to do. I'm a die cutter. I like my stuff die cut out. So I put a little bit of Distress ink and down there just to give it some shadow for it to set on. And this tape runner that I'm using right now, I'm honestly just trying to use it up because they no longer make this tape runner. It was an amazing tape runner, but they no longer make it. So I'll put the other one on here that I recommend and that I like. But that tape runner is no longer available. It's very, very, very sad. But anyway, so now I'm sorry this took me a minute to find the sequins and stuff that I wanted, but I wanted to put some bling and some jewels, and I needed to find a sentiment that I wanted to use for this, and I just wanted something plain, something simple that would go over top of it. And I think I took one from, it was a Hero Art set, and I'll pull it out and I'll link it over on my blog so you can see what the sentiment I used. And it just says, I just feel like giving you a card. And I thought, you know, that's actually kind of a sweet thing. I just felt like giving you a card, and here's some teacups to make you happy. And I don't necessarily, I notice there's no lines on my block or anything. I usually will put it on my mat and square it up, square the block up. I'm using VersaFine Onyx Black ink, so my card won't flip open on me. A little piece of washi tape there, and stamp that down directly. Ta-da! All done. Now I have some pretty pink posh sparkling jewels to use, and also some Nuvo oh, what is that called? Aqua Shimmer pen. There we go. Some Aqua Shimmer pen, and I put that all over the teacups. I didn't put it on anything else, just the teacups. A lot of people have complained about the jewel picker. I'm a fan of the jewel picker. I don't have any problems with it. I can't use the little end, but I can use the big end to pick my stuff up and put it down in adhesive. But I do like to lay my jewels out, or sequins out, or whatever my little embellishments are, all over my card, so I know the layout of them and where I want to put them, and make sure that they look appropriate. And a lot of times I actually will change my mind as I'm putting them down. So I just pick them up, put a dot of glue down, ta-da, done. And that's pretty much it. Thank you for joining me today. If you have any questions, let me know and I'll be happy to answer them. You have a wonderful day. Bye.